You might say President Biden has been a bit dodgy when it comes to answering questions about America's longest war, and he's been doing a lot of this lately.
I'm not supposed to take any questions, but go ahead.
Mr. President, on Afghanistan?
I'm not going to answer Afghanistan now.
Yeah, you should. You're the president. It's a real crisis, you a-hole. The political pressure on the president continues to mount, with 23 Republican congressmen and a handful of senators calling for him to resign for the way he's handled the end of the war. And now the White House says Biden will talk about Afghanistan in a speech tomorrow afternoon. But with the teleprompter in front of him and press exchanges carefully orchestrated, will he actually answer real questions? Let's find out with our Monday Night Man panel. We've got former CIA officer and Portman Square Group chairman and CEO Mike Baker is here, along with Fox News political analyst, the Juan Williams, and Libertarian Institute director and author of Fool's Errand. It's time to end the war in Afghanistan. Scott Horton is back. Welcome, everyone.
Hi. Thank you, Kennedy.
Hi. So, Mike, he's going to have a bunch of pre-selected questions, and it's not just people in the press who have been pre-selected to ask questions. You know those questions have been vetted by his comms department, and that means he's not really going to be challenged. If you could ask him anything and get the answer to it, what would it be?
Well, I would like to know if there's going to be any accountability for what turned out to be a clown show of a execution of a decision to leave. Right? I know there's obfuscation on the part of a number of people saying, well, we all support the idea to leave, you know, and it was made by the previous administration. Look, okay, fine. Everybody was on board with the previous administration with it, and they did the heavy lift of putting it on the table, saying it's time to go. Right? But the problem is the execution of the decision is awful. This was a logistical operation, a movement of personnel and material. And, you know, while four administrations own the Afghan situation, this administration clearly owns the execution of that decision to move out. So I'd like to know if there is going to be any accountability. I know the answer. I just want the question answered. It's Washington, D.C. There will be no accountability.
Yes, and President Obama said he was going to close Gitmo. There won't be accountability, but I want to know, so I didn't vote for President Trump either time. Juan, I voted for Gary Johnson and Joe Jorgensen when I had the choice against President Trump. That's neither here nor there. The one thing I liked about Trump is he took unscripted questions from the press. He would have these 75-minute slugfests with members of the media. They all yelled questions at him, and he yelled back, and he was the one who was speaking his own mind. When the President of the United States stands in front of the press corps during a multitude of crises and says, I'm not supposed to take any questions, who the hell is in charge?
Well, I think you're taking a cheap shot there, Kennedy. The guy was in the midst of FEMA, I believe. He was there at FEMA dealing with the hurricane, which is itself a... No, but he's in the midst of Afghanistan. I think he spoke every day last week on Afghanistan and over the weekend. And you're picking one spot where he was dealing with the hurricane, and that was what was the agenda in front of him.
It's not just one, and it's not just that he wouldn't answer questions on Afghanistan. He should have answered questions on Afghanistan, particularly after meeting those flag-draped coffins in Dover. He absolutely needs to answer questions about that, and he needs to be accountable. No, he didn't.
He's going to answer questions.
I'm not supposed to take any questions. According to whom? Who is in charge? Who's telling him not to take questions? When someone tells you not to take questions, when questions need to be taken, you say, I'm the president of the GD United States of America, and I will take your questions. Go ahead, Juan.
What if he decided that it wasn't the right place or time to speak about dead American heroes in the midst of dealing with a hurricane?
What about
dying,
stranded American citizens?
I just think there's a big issue here, a big issue about finally saying, you know what, this forever war is over, and saying it's time for us to move on. This is not 2001 when 9/11 happened. Osama bin Laden is dead. We've got warring tribes and Afghans versus Taliban versus ISIS going on over there. Yeah. And we don't need our soldiers in the midst of that chaos and civil war.
Yeah. So let's botch the withdrawal to make sure Americans and Afghan civilians die. Scott, your thoughts?
I think you should blame that Taliban and you should blame the Afghan government for folding like a cheap tent.
The tent wasn't really cheap. The tent cost about $85 billion for the Afghan security forces and $2 trillion for the war. Now let's let Scott come in and talk.
He took the words right out of my mouth there. Look, I mean, Biden made a terrible decision, a political decision, to kick the can down the road. As we talked about 2 weeks ago here, we had a deal to withdraw on May 1st. And by kicking the can down the road, the Taliban didn't. And they kept to their schedule of taking over the whole country, which I think, worked a lot easier than they thought it would be. There was very little fighting. It was pretty much a political win across the country. But by kicking the can down the road and by refusing to tell the American people the truth, that this entire Afghan government and its military were all just a Potemkin village, then they cornered themselves. The correct answer should have been that Biden should have said on January 21st, General, we're sticking with the deadline. I want all the civilians out first, and then I want you to destroy all the weapons you're leaving to the Afghan National Army. Now think about how badly they would have been attacked for undermining the army and undermining the government. But the truth is, without doing that, they all fell anyway. And now the Taliban got all the weapons, and you have Americans stuck and not able to get to the airport. And I had a source, an Army officer, a paratrooper officer, who told me on July 14th that they were preparing to go back and drop paratroopers and re-seize the Bagram Air Base that they'd already turned over to the Afghan National Army in order to use that for this fall of Saigon moment, because they knew it was coming. So they had that plan, and then they put it off, and they put it off until the ANA turned it over to the Taliban, and by then it was far too late to use it. So this whole war has been FUBAR from the very beginning. It would have been a miracle if somehow the withdrawal went off without a hitch. But they made really bad decisions to make it this way, Kennedy.
Yes, and I hope people don't forget about that. And I hope there is a gigantic, unending post-mortem so we can see how badly you can screw something like this up. Man panel sticking around. Meanwhile, another high-profile Democrat spouting hate for their fellow citizens. Former Secretary of Education under President Obama, Arne Duncan, who is a human billboard for abolishing the Department of Education, now comparing Americans opposed to COVID mandates to suicide bombers. He tweeted, quote, "Have you noticed how strikingly similar both the mindsets and actions between the suicide bombers at Kabul's airport and the anti-mask, anti-vax people here? They both blow themselves up, inflict harm on those around them, and are convinced they are fighting for freedom." So how long until these psychos call for drone strikes on the unvaccinated? The man panel is back. Mike Baker, Juan Williams, and Scott Horton. What do you think of that tweet, Mike?
Yeah, look, it's impressive. It's obnoxiously self-righteous, arrogant, piece of bloviation. And his only excuse really is if he was drunk, which would then just make him a drunk douche. What I would like to do is I would like to use the remaining time that I have on the debate stage to revisit our previous discussion about, what do we hope to see out of this mess of a withdrawal in terms of accountability. I don't believe, again, that there will be sort of if anybody's waiting for senior military or government officials to step down, and all the talk about resignation and impeachment is ridiculous. It's gamemanship in Washington, D.C. What I do think would be important is each element, the military, the intel community, State Department, will be doing their own internal hot wash of this whole situation. I mean, I know the game very well from inside, and I know that's what they will be doing, internal assessments. What I think would be really important for the American people is if they would present those assessments publicly. Oftentimes, these things don't get done because they're classified. I think they need to think that very carefully, and I think they need to release their internal assessments as to decisions that were made, assessments that were ignored, and put that out there. And I think that would be the best result that we're going to get from this whole situation.
Juan, is Arne Duncan a douche, or do you agree with him that suicide bombers and people skeptical of vaccines have the same mindset? That's what his picture says. Sorry. Go ahead.
I love you, Kennedy.
I love you too.
I think he's right. I mean, I think people who refuse to get the vaccine, people who, like, you look at the governors of Florida and Texas, and you look at the raging numbers of COVID outbreaks. taking us all the way back, sacrificing all the progress we've made, allowing the variant to gain a foothold. That's damaging to the whole country. People say, oh, well, it's my right.
It's not like
I
a
have the
suicide
personal
bomb.
freedom.
Yeah. That's like, if
Well,
you're
to
one of those
me-
people
to
who
me,
thinks
if
that
they're
January
killing-
6th
if you're
was worse than
killing
9/11,
yourself-
you're out of your mind. I'm sorry. I'm
No.
sad for you. I'm actually
I
sad for
say
you.
if you
Sad.
refuse to get vaccinated in the middle of a pandemic, you are trying to kill yourself.
Not necessarily. What if you have natural immunity? Scott Horton, your thoughts?
Okay.
Well, you know, the center
Well,
left
I think you can
Democrats
point to
have
exceptions.
kept up this narrative.
Thank you for that. That was wonderful. I disagree with you respectfully. And now we're going to let Scott have a chance. Go ahead, Scott.
Oh, I thought
the
you were talking
Democrats
to me.
No,
keep
I'm talking
accusing-
to Scott. Go ahead, Scott.
Oh, no, it's me now. All right. Look, the Democrats keep accusing the entire political right of undermining the basic norms of democracy and all these kinds of things, invoking January 6th and that kind of thing. And yet they continually demonize the entire political right of this country. And when she says people who are reluctant to wear masks or get vaccines, she's only referring to, I'm sorry, was it he? Is only the Democrats. They're only referring to the right wing, although that's certainly not who all are denying this. But
No.
I encourage people to look up Tom Woods' great quiz where the science seems to report that in limited circumstances masks seem to help, but Tom Woods has this quiz where you check to see which city and which states apply mask mandates at which times, and you try to guess to see, based on the numbers of hospitalizations and cases and deaths, which mask mandate was in place when, and I'll go ahead and spoil it for you, you can't tell.
Oh.
Because the mask mandates make no difference whatsoever. It's just a system of control to no great effect.
Okay, so Juan, let me ask you this. The 70% of African Americans in New York City who have not gotten the vaccine, are they suicide bombing terrorists?
Yeah, I think you're crazy. That's what I just told you. I think people who refuse to get this vaccine are ignoring reality, and they're deciding that for some reason they will. Now, in the black community, you have all this talk about, the government's never looking out for you and the like. But again, it's nowhere near the case when you have such a, at this point, proven, because it's 52% of Americans who've had 2 shots, 70% have had 1 shot. So we can see how this has played out. And at this point, you're not dealing with reality. You're buying into crazy conspiracy theories simply to, act out of defiance and rage. I don't think there's any sense to it.
Yeah, it's the same exact thing as murderous jihadis blowing up women and babies. Same thing. That moral equivalence, it fits perfectly. One,
but Kennedy,
you are you've totally changed my mind. I want to drink your
Kennedy,
rational
you have kids,
Jesus juice.
You have kids.
Yeah. I do.
Kennedy, you have kids who
least
aren't
2 that I know
vaccinated.
of.
Those people put those kids at risk.
Those people. My kids are vaccinated because they wanted to be vaccinated because they're smart young people and they're not adults who talk crazy nonsense. Man panel, I want to thank you all. Mike, Juan, and Scott, thank you for coming back.
You're welcome.
Bye.